We did have a registration of some 67 people as of last night, uh, and ordered food and breakfast accordingly. But there are a lot of people in the college who would not object to a snack or something, so that will not go to waste. Um, the last time I was in this room for a breakfast talk was March 6th, 2020. It was a talk on, we had a traffic commissioner here, we had the head of the Municipal Art Society, we have an architect, and they were talking about what the city and state were going to do about the section of the Brooklyn Queens Expressway that runs under the promenade that's about to fall off. And I guess it hasn't fallen off, nor have they done anything. So, perhaps. But that was, and then I guess the very next week, the city closed down, City University closed down. When we were at that meeting on the 6th, we thought nothing about masks, but we were bumping elbows instead of shaking hands. Who knew? City Tech was, we lost people. We actually, we had a memorial for some of the people we lost. And the thing that broke my heart the most were the number of students who we lost. Not astronomically, we lost students though, as well as some faculty and a retired faculty who, Sister Georgiana Close, and I'm mentioning her because she was still adjuncting. She had been the chairperson of the Social Services, Human Services Department at the college, which is appropriate for our topic today. And she was retired, she was adjuncting, she taught a course at the college, and she was also working with people in the neighborhood, and she succumbed to that. So, but today, let's talk. We are privileged to have two guests with us. Those of you who are in the neighborhood, there's that building down at the end of J Street that has puzzled many of us and wondering what it was. We knew there was some connection to the Jehovah's Witnesses. But what puzzles me, and we're going to find out, is how did a not-for-profit organization manage to get that property in Dumbo and use it for human services? So we will hear about that soon. And so it's my pleasure to introduce two of our guests. Our first is Amie Pospisil, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Breaking Ground. That is the real estate arm, would you call it? The real estate arm of the operation. And she's going to tell us how they acquired the property. And that organization provides oversight and development, and they have been working closely for a long time, if not from the beginning, with another organization called the Community CUCS, Community Urban Center for Urban Community Services. Okay, so I got the name right. There we go. And so Sarah is now the Deputy Chief Program Officer of the center, and she was responsible for opening up 90 Sand, and now she is overseeing programs around the city for the organization, but she has intimate knowledge of how it was like to open up the center, and they have been in operation since February 2022? Okay, September 2022. So relatively new. So I am pleased to present our first speaker.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amie Pospisil with Breaking Ground. I'll give a little bit of background about the organization just to kind of set some context for everybody. Breaking Ground has been around since 1990. We got our start with our flagship building, the first building called the Times Square, which still stands as the nation's largest supportive housing residence in Times Square on 43rd and 8th Avenue. In 1990, that building at one time had been an opulent hotel in its heyday, but had fell into a state of disrepair. The city was using it as what they called at that time as an old welfare hotel. It was completely dilapidated, really beyond the point of repair, most thought. But we got that building, and we were able to turn that into about 650 units of supportive and affordable housing. So that was the first project of ours that led to many more. Today we have about 24, 25 supportive and affordable housing residences with about 5,000 units in operation, and another 1,000 to 2,000 units in our development pipeline. So the first stage of our life at Breaking Ground, for the first 15 or so years, we acquired 3 old hotel type buildings. So the Times Square, and then another one, the Prince George, on 28th between 5th and Madison. And the old McBurney Y from the YMCA video that we all know, in Chelsea. And those were our first 3 buildings we had for the first half of our life, and developed those into affordable and supportive housing. Supportive housing is affordable housing with wraparound on-site supports for folks who are exiting homelessness and have special needs, serious mental illness, active substance use disorders, serious medical conditions, or combinations of those. People sign leases and they have their housing in perpetuity. People who exit homelessness and move into our supportive housing have a 98% retention rate. So they're pretty much there with us until they pass, really, on that side of things. On the affordable side of the work we do, and about 60% of the units in our buildings are for formerly homeless, and the balance is for low income. Each building is a little bit different in terms of how we scale the income level requirements. But most of them are at or below the 60%, 50% AMI, area median income. And the social service component in our buildings, starting with the Times Square building, CUCS has been our long-term partner, bringing the social service aspect to that work in those buildings. And then fast forwarding a little bit, so the first 3 buildings we had the first half of our life, and then in the early 2000s, when the price of land in Manhattan was completely unaffordable and inaccessible to us, we started with ground up new development, primarily in the outer boroughs. So that's when really the bulk of our new development work happened. And we brought on units in the Bronx, primarily in the Bronx and in Brooklyn. And it was all ground up new development. And over the years, we've gotten kind of kept up with the newest architecture and development. And in fact, we have 2 buildings now, one that's in operation that is passive house design, which is the newest state-of-the-art energy efficiency building. So we're super proud of the work that we do on the development end to bring beautiful design and healthy design into our buildings for our low-income and formerly homeless neighbors. Another part of the work that we do, at Breaking Ground is as a service provider. So in addition to all of the permanent supportive housing buildings that we operate, We also have the city's largest above-ground street outreach contract. So we cover all of Brooklyn, all of Queens, and a huge chunk of Midtown Manhattan 24/7 through city-funded contracts to engage people who are chronically street homeless and help connect them to services and housing. Oftentimes, they end up moving into our very own permanent supportive housing, which offers just a really wonderful continuity of care and services when folks are moving. They know us from the street, and then they know us in our permanent housing settings too. And sandwiched in between those two things, we have transitional housing. So we have right now about 500 units of specialized transitional safe haven housing specifically for people who are working with our street outreach programs and exiting long-term street homelessness. And again, it's an optional step, but many of the folks we're working with on the street move through those transitional housing settings on their way to permanent supportive housing. So both as a developer, we also operate all of our permanent supportive housing. So we are the property manager as well in those buildings. And even, most of our buildings, we do have a social service partner. We do provide some of the services in some of our own buildings. But we are a mission-based nonprofit and are deeply committed to the work that we're doing with chronically street homeless folks. So we have that, again, kind of that common thread and that continuity through these three big buckets of the work we do. So kind of diving into 90 Sands a little bit, we've come full circle into sort of from a development perspective in this third phase of our life, where we're now kind of going back to our rehabilitation of old hotel-ish type buildings. So we've been able to do that with 90 Sands, and we have another one in our development pipeline as well. And we're also continuing to do ground up new development. So there's not enough supportive housing to meet the need. There are for every 5 applicants, there's about 1 unit of available supportive housing in the city. So in addition to just what I think probably everybody knows, that generally speaking, there's a lack of affordable housing for New Yorkers, but then even that more specialized supportive housing, there's also an incredible shortage of that. So we are deeply committed to continuing to develop more to serve the folks and to help the folks that we're serving through our programs. So a bit about 90 Sands. Hold on, I'm gonna set my coffee down. And I have a couple of notes because the acquisition was quite complicated and very special. So really, this was a once in a generation opportunity for us. 90 Sands was originally developed in 1992 by the Jehovah's Witnesses. It was operated as a residential hotel for all of their staff and volunteers, many of them who were working at some of the other sites that they had in Dumbo, where they were making the publications that they would send out and other things. So 90 Sands was the residential building for them. They began to sell off their Brooklyn real estate assets around 2011 because they moved their campus to upstate to Warwick, New York. So as they started kind of parsing up and selling off some of those buildings here in Dumbo, we became aware of the 90 Sands opportunity before it hit the market. It was really kind of by chance that we were able to learn about this building before it hit the market. And as soon as our CEO, Brenda Rosen, and our head of real estate development toured the site and saw it, they immediately said to the owners at the time, who were RFR, that we must have this for supportive housing. This is the perfect opportunity for supportive housing, and we must get this. The original intention was to develop it into luxury hotel, but it didn't come to fruition because by the time that the Witnesses were selling it and that was being looked at, the hotel market had softened, and there were other elements of the building that just didn't make it viable from RFR's perspective to be able to develop it into hotel. It would have been too costly. It would have, the economics wouldn't have worked for them. So it was really a very kind of serendipitous opportunity and moment for us where it wasn't working out for them for their original plans. We saw it and we said this would be perfect for supportive housing, and we must have this. So we worked very swiftly, very hard. So when we acquire a building like this, there's a lag between what it takes for a nonprofit, especially, to be able to put together the financing in order to acquire the building. And it takes more time than the for-profit community would typically like. You know, it took us there was a gap of about 18 months that they had to kind of wait more or less for us to put the financing package together. And fortunately for us, they were willing to do that. And the city took some big chances on it. So the other thing that kind of happened was around the zoning. So this is in an M1 district, for anybody who's familiar with some of the development aspects of things, which is light manufacturing and commercial district, although there's a precedent for being able to develop hotel style supportive housing, including 2 of our own buildings in Manhattan where there's precedent for that. So we were really optimistic that we wouldn't have to go through the city's ULURP or land use process to be able to do this development. But and the city actually was willing to make the financial commitment in this building, knowing that either we would be fortunate enough to not have to go through ULURP, or if we did, we would be successful in that ULURP process. We did end up having to go through it. Unfortunately, those are tough processes, but we did, you know, we prevailed obviously and made it through. So, it was in 2019, October of 2019, where we started the ULURP process, and we gained the approval in April of 2020. And then we were able to start construction in November of 2020. And as Sarah mentioned before, we opened up the building in the fall of 2022. COVID slowed some of that down. So it certainly it did impact, but we were fortunate enough to at least be able to continue the forward momentum and movement with the development even throughout that process. A little bit about the financing. So we acquired it for about $175 million. And that was largely with a loan from HPD, City's Housing Preservation Department, $155 million loan from HPD, a $10 million grant from Enterprise Community Partners, a sponsor loan from Breaking Ground of about $7 million, and $2 million of discretionary funding from City Council. And at the time, Steve Levin was a council member. So we leveraged all of that to be able to acquire the building. Also uniquely, what really allowed us to be able to close the final deal, we were able to use some of the air rights that we have from a building that we have in Manhattan to use those air rights as a non-cash way of getting the developer to seal the deal with us. So we sold some of those air rights so that we could get across the finish line of this building, which is a really, really rare. I don't know if it's ever been done before with a nonprofit to be able to do that, to finalize that acquisition. We also raised another $5 million of philanthropic support to be able to get across the finish line. So, and I can dig into any of that a little bit more if people have questions towards the end of it. But I'll pivot a little bit and talk about some of the operations of 90 Sands. So throughout all of that process between the 2017-18-ish timeframe and when it came to fruition in 2022, we did a lot of work, as we do always when we go into new communities, to help folks understand who we are and what the building is going to be, how we operate, and what this is. So we were especially involved. We spent a lot of time with the folks from Concord Village, with the Business Improvement District, with the council member's office and other stakeholders, to do whatever we could do to help folks understand what this housing is, and what our responsibility is, both for the tenants and the community of our building, but also to the larger community. When we develop, it is intentional, and it's part of our fabric and our DNA to ensure that we're being the best partners we can be to the communities, and to integrate both our tenants into the community and bring the community into our buildings wherever we can do that. So we started those conversations really early on. And as we opened the building, we immediately developed a community advisory board. So many of those folks, Brooklyn Public Library, the council member's office, folks from Concord Village, we have the Downtown Brooklyn Alliance, and I think some folks from Brooklyn Bridge Park are all, and others are part of the community advisory board that we bring in, I think quarterly, Sarah? We bring them in quarterly, and both our partners at CUCS and our Breaking Ground staff meet with them to talk about really anything. We bring them in and we have the meetings on site whenever we can. We show them the building. We do building tours for them. We want them to feel like they understand what's going on, right? We want transparency. We want people to feel like they're a part of us too, and they know what's going on. We invite them to bring any concerns that might be happening, so that we can, if there are issues, we want to resolve them, right? We want to get those taken care of and nip them in the bud right away. So we invite all of that conversation to happen, so we can be the best partners. So those continue to happen and will be ongoing. So at 90 Sands, Breaking Ground is the property manager. We're the owner, developer, operator of that building. So as a property manager in that building, what we do, we are responsible for the front desk security. So we have 24/7, round the clock, 365 security coverage at the building, both from a life safety, fire safety perspective. We have guards that have the qualifications to ensure that they can manage any fire emergency that comes up, and all of the requirements around fire safety. But also as just a front desk check, right? It makes folks in our buildings feel like they're being taken care of too, that we have somebody there around the clock that is just checking folks' ID. It's permanent housing, so they can come in, right? They can have guests, they can come in, they can bring their own belongings, whatever they bring in. They have to abide by their lease, of course. But having that security team there gives folks a sense of normalcy, also just a sense of kind of that general safety. And that's an important element that we bring into all of our buildings. We also have a full team of maintenance staff. So we have housekeepers, we have an on-site super, we have engineers, we have others. This building is quite big and complicated from a building facilities perspective, like from a systems perspective, the HVAC and the boiler and the water, it's old enough. And it's massive. So it has some really, really complicated elements to managing those things. So we have some really skilled staff on board who can help us manage those technical aspects of things that way beyond my knowledge. We also handle rent collection responsibilities, lease renewals, recertification process. So anybody going into affordable and supportive housing on an annual basis, they have to recertify to verify that they remain eligible for this type of housing. So we do the recertification process with every single person. And the rent collection element is also a really important part of it, because again, as a leaseholder, one of their lease obligations is that they pay a portion of their rent. It's no more than 30% of their income. And for our folks exiting homelessness, a lot of times that income is a Social Security disability benefit. It might be their public assistance benefit. So we work with each tenant and in partnership with CUCS to help ensure that folks maintain paying their rent, that they have the ability to continue to pay rent, that they stay connected to their benefits. And if they've fallen on hard times or they've, for any reason, fallen behind on their rent, that we have a strategy in place to help them get back on track. That's often one of the first indicators that something else might be going on with that person, and they need more of a service intervention or something else. So we really take every effort we can to not look at it as a punitive thing, right? Like, we don't want to, you didn't pay your rent, now we're going to take legal action. We want to use that as an opportunity to engage with them and help keep them housed. And it can oftentimes be a way that we can get them involved with the service partner at a deeper level. We have a building director on site. We have an assistant building director. So we have a team of people there ensuring that we're keeping a well-maintained, safe, clean community. And that team partners really closely, even though we separate the responsibility between property manager and social service provider, we work really, really closely together to help people maintain their housing, right? And there might be things that our maintenance staff is observing that the social service staff is completely unaware of. If we don't share that with them and have a mechanism for communication and problem solving and working together, then we miss an opportunity to, again, bring an intervention before it becomes, something that's more problematic. So we really look at every opportunity we can to partner closely together. So we have weekly management meetings. Our staff works very close in proximity. We have on-site staff offices in the building for everybody, which is really a helpful component of it. I'm going to pass it off to Sarah here momentarily to talk more in a deeper way about who we serve and how we serve them. I'll just give a quick little glimpse because it was a really interesting building to walk into and see how the witnesses were living. It was gorgeously maintained. It was really, really well maintained. The units were beautiful. We rehabbed them, and they're even more beautiful. There's like triple paned glass on all of the windows, so there is no noise whatsoever. The views, of course, are amazing. So that's a really special aspect of the building, of course. But we renovated. I think it was about a $45 million renovation that we did to upgrade some of the building systems, the HVAC and other things. We reconfigured the entire lobby space, brought natural light in, created a security desk. So we have that kind of vestibule area for folks to come into. We have mailboxes for everybody. And we also have a multi-purpose room that we created in the downstairs area so we can have a place to hold activities and meetings and events for the tenants. We created, I think it's about a 7,000 square foot outdoor plaza space that's open to the public. It's still, we're still finishing it up a bit, but it is open and accessible right there at the corner of J Street and 90 Sands. And we also we've been able to create, because it's such a massive building, there's also space that we were able to create for our street to home outreach program that operates in Brooklyn. And they were formerly headquartered out of an office space in Williamsburg. And we are now going to be moving them and relocating them to this building, which will also bring a lot of, in addition to just having more staff and additional support, but it's also because so many of our folks that we're working with on the street move into our own housing, it's an opportunity for those clients that we're serving on the street to see in reality how this works and what's available to them. Really interestingly, so the units themselves were really well maintained. They all have their own bathrooms and cooking facilities, like a stove and sink and refrigerator. They weren't used very much because they have an enormous, I'm talking enormous commercial kitchen space. And I think there's like 2 or 3 basement levels, but in the sub basement, like a coffee urn that I think like 4 of us could probably all jump into and fit into this coffee urn, because what the witnesses did, even though there were cooking facilities in each one of the units, which we maintain, by the way, all of our units have their own kitchen facilities and bathrooms, but they cooked communal meals for them every single day, and they served them all at one time. So there was a gigantic dining area that they would all come down and eat, and the meals were served, and they served them all in one seating. So it was like, I think it was a couple hundred people. I'm looking to Marina, my colleague over here that knows probably the details. I think it was, I think probably a couple hundred people at any given time were eating more, maybe. So the walk-in refrigerator and freezer is the size of a very nicely sized 1-bedroom of our studio apartment, I should say, in Manhattan. I could move in there. So just really, really enormous. And we do hope and have plans. That commercial kitchen right now has not been renovated. And our intent is to be able to partner ideally with a tenant who would come in and be able to use that space. COVID really did kind of get in the way of that a bit, because we know that the hospitality industry is really still having a hard time bouncing back. So we had high hopes of maybe bringing in like a ghost kitchen or something like that that would be able to use the space. And we will eventually, but right now we don't have a tenant identified for that space. So eventually we look forward to being able to do that, because it's quite an interesting thing to see, and just massive space. So I'll hand it off to my colleague over here, Sarah, and she can talk about the work of CUCS, and then happy to bring it back after she's finished to open it up for Q&A and discussion.
Thank you, Amie. Amie gave a really good overview of a lot of what we do. I'll speak a little overlap to some things that she spoke to already, just in terms of where Breaking Ground and CUCS align. There's very much been a historical partnership between Breaking Ground and CUCS. You start with the physical structure of housing for folks, and then we move into what the support looks like. So where we approach the work that we do is from a housing first model. And if anyone's taken a Psych 101 or Intro to Psych course at any point in your life, Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes to mind and resonates with a very fundamental theory, which is basically your physiological needs need to be met before you can start going into addressing more complex needs like physical health, mental health, addiction, any of these things, trauma. So where the housing first model comes in is addressing the issue of shelter. Where CUCS comes in, after we have this beautiful building at 90 Sands, we provide the on-site supportive services to folks who are living in the building. So we have on-site case management staff, on-site social workers, we have on-site medical providers, on-site psychiatrists who can all work individually with folks in the building on a one-to-one basis to address some of those other things that have come up. I believe it was 2015, there was a commitment by the city through de Blasio to create 15,000 supportive housing units in the city over the course of 15 years. 90 Sands is a part of that project. So 305 of the units in 90 Sands are part of that NYC 1515 funding stream. So folks are eligible in those units based off of history of chronic street homelessness, as well as a mental health diagnosis and or a substance use diagnosis. So perhaps co-occurring, perhaps more individualized in terms of substance use or a mental health diagnosis. So the way we approach our work is very much from a person-centered approach. We work with each person individually. Each case manager and social worker has a caseload of about 15 people in the building. So it's a very manageable and small group of people that case managers are able to support. There's benefits assistance. There's, as we're talking about with Amie, addressing if there's rental issues, apartment maintenance issues. But then we also go into what that person's daily living is looking like and the services they might need. As I mentioned, there's an arm of CUCS called Janian. They provide the on-site medical and psychiatric services. So folks are able to voluntarily enroll in those services within the program, which really allows an intimacy to the level of service that folks might need, where there might be barriers to accessing care in the community. This is something we realized, I would say probably about a decade ago, where a lot of our service recipients were not getting access to the medical and mental health care that they needed in the communities due to just some organic barriers that oftentimes were contributing to the experience of homelessness in the past. And this is where we instituted our on-site medical and psych services. We're able to do a whole litany of things in terms of the service provision, and again, in the intimacy between the case management and the medical service staff. So as we've mentioned, the doors to 90 Sands opened in September 2022 to begin moving people in, and it was a pretty rapid process. It took years and years, as Amie mentioned, to develop the property. And at the time of the building's readiness to open, there was really a high demand on the shelter system, particularly in terms of the migrant crisis. And so the city turned to Breaking Ground and CUCS to really help with that process and expedite the move-in at 90 Sands. So within 1 week, we moved in 80 people, which was very rapid. Perspective-wise, that was extremely rapid, and we kept up the pace. So weekly after that, we moved in 10 people a week. So Rent Up started in 2022, September 22, and we finished in the spring of 2023. And here we are in the winter of 2023. Additional services that we'll provide on site. A lot of what I speak about in terms of the CUCS perspective, it starts with relationship. You can't just put people in a building and expect them to thrive. We have to work with folks where they're at. We develop individualized service plans in terms of goals that people may have in mind for things that they would like to achieve now that they are housed. And it starts with the relationship that you're able to build between the supportive housing staff and the folks that we're serving. And I think that's one of the most meaningful parts of the work is when you can build that and build that community also. A lot of our folks do struggle with various things going on, and at the baseline of that is trauma. Homelessness is a trauma in and of itself, and the factors that lead to homelessness are often very traumatic. So we try to provide, well, we don't try, we do provide trauma-informed services. We train our staff in terms of the skills needed to provide those services and work with folks where they are. We also build relationships with community partners. And I was mentioning to Richard earlier, it was a very pleasant surprise to realize how many services were available in Dumbo to our folks. Cal and Lord is a clinic right around the corner. So for folks who would prefer to access medical care in the community, we have something very close and available on Chapel Street or Church Street, whichever one of those ones, Chapel. There's also another community provider, Center for Community Alternatives, that provides substance use counseling and treatment. And we've been able to broker a relationship with them very closely where we're able to connect with folks in the building to services if they are struggling with a substance use or addiction issue, and try to support them in a collaborative way. So that's a lot of what CUCS does in our supportive housing programs and specifically at 90 Sands. I would say about the first 6 months of moving into an apartment, I would call a critical time intervention period. There's a lot of changes moving into an apartment and stable housing from the shelter or street homelessness is a wonderful thing. Any transition for any of us can be really challenging. So there can be some very particular challenges that come when you move in that 6-month period right after going in. So we try to very specifically provide higher level of check-in and support to folks after they've moved in during that time period. I think that pretty much covers what I am thinking in terms of the housing support services and the clinical services that we offer. But I imagine there might be questions, particularly regarding the acquisition of the program or the functioning of the program. So I can turn it back over to Amie or over to Richard for questions.
Well, I guess we will already have questions. We'll have Nico, who will have this mic and 1, 2, yes. If you, when you ask a question, if you could just identify yourself and your organization, or and yes, there will be a lot of questions. And I wonder if you could, before the questions begin, give us someone who might be a typical tenant. How did he or she get there? How long was he or she homeless? Just before.
That's a great question. That's a great first question. So again, the qualifying criteria involves chronic street homelessness, which is considered a year or more of being homeless or within the shelter system. So somebody moving in, and this is something I should have mentioned, so thank you, Richard, for prompting it. 90 Sands was a pilot in the sense that we were working to expedite the process of application of qualification for supportive housing. So a lot of folks came through, there were referrals through DHS, the Department of Homeless Services, but also direct referrals through the Breaking Ground outreach team, as well as the CUCS outreach team and the Manhattan Outreach Consortium, which is other providers such as Goddard, Riverside. Are there any others, Amie, that I'm forgetting? Yeah.
Mostly. I guess it would be any of the city-funded street outreach teams or subway outreach teams. We tried to have kind of referral process so we could expedite things.
Yeah, so there was sort of an expedited direct referral process for 90 Sands. And with the move-in process, there's the lease signing and then there's the intake with the social service provider. The outreach also follows tenants for up to 3 months after they've moved in, longer if necessary. So the team that they were working with prior to moving into the permanent housing site does follow them to make sure that there's basically a warm, soft handoff. In terms of trying to think of a typical tenant, that's an interesting question. Do you have somebody in mind, Amie?
I mean, I might just say, I don't have an exact tenant, but just, the average length of homelessness that our street outreach folks are working with, the people that we're working with on the street, the average length of homelessness is still over 8 years. So we're really 8 years. Yeah. So many folks have been, they've not had stable housing, perhaps their entire adult life, right? Sometimes it's decades of unhoused experience. So the people who are moving into 90 Sands through our street outreach programs and even the shelter system do have long terms of instability from that perspective and lack of housing. So, and part of the eligibility criteria for supportive housing is that it's homelessness, but also folks that are, that might have a mental health diagnosis, a substance use diagnosis, severe medical, or serious medical condition, or a combination of those things. And which, by the way, also, as Sarah mentioned, folks who've been living on the streets or even in shelter for that period of time, it's just not uncommon to see a combination kind of many of those factors happening. Also with the overlay of lots of really deep trauma, either before experiencing homelessness or during their homeless episodes. So that gives a little bit of context. Most of the people, so it's a disproportionate number of the folks that we're serving on the street are men. I think it's about 85-ish% of the folks that we're serving on the street tend to be men. And the average age is still on the street. It's still around mid-50s. But but there's a little bit trending a little bit younger with some of the folks at 90 Sands. But still, I think that's a good rule of kind of thumb, generally speaking. But one thing important to note is what we understand in our sector is that people who've experienced long-term homelessness, especially long-term street homelessness, they're medically speaking, they're about 20 years older than what their biological age is. So when we're bringing somebody inside who's, early 50s, mid 50s, we're really talking about folks that have medical conditions, of those folks who are 20 to 30, even up to 30 years later. So the vulnerability of most of these folks is really quite severe.
Okay, so.
Thank you very much. David M. Sokol. I used to work here. Not here, but in the architectural technology department. Wonderful, wonderful presentation. I mean, write that up and that's the map to the whole thing. Anyway, I have lots of questions. I'll try to keep it brief. My first question was, what kind of relationship do you have with places like the Brooklyn Navy Yard, OAC, older adult centers? You mentioned Goddard, Project Find, stuff like that. Do the people who live there sometimes have jobs? And what percentage, and since it is a lease kind of arrangement, are they allowed to form tenants associations with the possibility of striking? The mind goes on. And lastly, you mentioned that when you first heard about the building, you were thinking of developing a luxury hotel, and that struck me as kind of oxymoronic for a nonprofit. What was the thinking behind, we're a nonprofit, we're going to open up a luxury hotel, and there are lots of hotels on Adams. What made you think that this area needed a luxury hotel?
It actually was not us. It was the purchaser from the witnesses. So RFR was the owner that we acquired from was RFR, and that company who had purchased it from the
I got the impression that
sorry about that.
That would be oxymoronic, right?
Yeah. No, sorry about that. That would be an entirely new line of business that I don't know. I am certainly not qualified to go in that direction, but
Programs at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I once had a space there, science-based and community-based. Oh, and the last question is, what's the relationship with the Board of Education?
got it.
And there are any children in the building?
Got it. I'll answer some of those and I'll have Sarah talk more specifically about the partnership and community partnership stuff. Generally speaking, we love community partnerships, and any opportunity to, to connect and do that is great. So I'll let her talk a little bit more about that. Some of the tenant stuff. So these are, we don't have any families in 90 Sands. Some of our other buildings we do, but not here. The formerly homeless units, so 305 of the 490 units at 90 Sands for the formerly homeless are all studio units. The others are all one bedrooms, I think, the balance, right, for all the low income are all one bedrooms. And those low income units, by the way, all of those units go through the city's housing lottery system. So that's a really, rigid and rigorous, highly regulated process for how we select the applicants and bring them through the process. So certainly they do have the ability to add people to the lease as long as it complies, the space regulations, allow for that. So they certainly can do that. We see that sometimes with the low income units, less so with the formerly homeless units. I'll speak a little bit about the jobs, to answer the question about the jobs. We do have lots of folks who are working. On the low income side, I mean, pretty much they all are, right? And part of how the eligibility requirements are income based. That's a major component of the eligibility. So the vast majority of the low income folks are working and have some kind of employment. For the formerly homeless tenants, many of them do work as well. We tend to see, I would say, and Sarah, correct me if I'm misspeaking, but fewer of them have kind of long-term employment if you compare it to the low-income population. Many of them have part-time jobs or seasonal jobs, or they might have a job for a little while, then it kind of goes away, and then maybe they have another job. And also, many of them are on Social Security disability benefits or public assistance. So that also, kind of can conflict sometimes with those benefits. And so a lot of the work that CUCS does and Breaking Down Ground will do in our other programs is help folks find employment opportunities that are that right fit, that don't jeopardize any of their benefit eligibility, but also gets them kind of what they need. And Sarah, you may want to talk about CUCS has a specialized workforce employment program for people who have mental health challenges and others around the tenant association. So yeah, they all have leases. They do have the ability. We do have some buildings where tenants have formed an association or a group. And so we allow them the space to do that. We work we try as a management company and with our social service partners to be the best landlords and service providers that we can be and be aligned on the messaging. We want to hear, frankly, and we do hold regular town hall meetings of the building to hear any concerns they might have. We have grievance processes, so we make it really well known and accessible. If anybody does want to share a concern or a grievance with us, we have processes for them to do that, and lots of opportunity to hear from the tenants, so that we are trying to be the best best management company we can be. And did I miss any questions?
When they renovated, are the stoves electric or gas?
All electric.
Okay.
All electric.
And
In
the
all
heating?
of our buildings, all electric.
And the heating is steam, hot water, or
I
electric?
think it's steam, Marina. What is it? Hot water? Thank you, Marina.
Water baseboard?
Baseboard? Do you know? I think so.
In
Yeah.
terms of being able to design and use the wall space, sometimes the
Right.
baseboard prevents you from,
Yep.
from an architectural point of view.
Yes, yes, totally.
All
And
gas.
totally. And of course, when we're doing rehab or renovation of existing spaces, we have less opportunity to, we sometimes have to work with what we have in the space. In our new buildings, our design, can become kind of more, more efficient like that.
And the rent is including electricity?
Yeah, the utilities, Marina, what,
So a lot of people don't realize when they get electric heating, electric stove, their electric bill goes.
yeah, no, we don't do that. But there's a utility that they pay for anything at 90? You see nothing, right? It's all included.
And are pets allowed?
Good question there too. So we do have, so we allow for pets to come. So a few of our buildings, you don't have to have any paperwork or anything. I mean, there's rules around having your pets. You have to have, they have to have all their vaccines and there's kind of rules around how the pet is maintained. At 90 Sands and most of our buildings, the way that we do it is through, either a service animal or an emotional support animal, which our service providers are able to help anybody obtain the paperwork and documentation. And really it's really just so we can kind of put some guardrails in place so that we can make sure that we have processes, because you can, if you imagine things like what happens if the tenant, and again, if they're highly vulnerable, it's not uncommon that our folks might need to go into a hospital, to recover from a medical procedure or whatever. And what are they going to do if they have the pet, and how do we handle that? So we spend a lot of time working with the tenants to try and be as thoughtful as possible, to support them around their pets, but also put some process and systems in place so that we're thinking about things like what happens if you're not here, what happens if you're not able to, to take care of the pet, or things like making sure that they're staying on top of the health care of their pet. I will offer a really quick little tangent example, something that we've done in one of our other buildings. This is a partnership with the medical provider, Jamie, that's part of CUCS, but we have coupled people healthcare with pet healthcare, and we bring veterinary services with our psychiatrists and medical provider. Because a lot of our tenants, a lot of the clients that we serve, they will get they will come if they can get their pet care, but they don't want to think about their own care, right? It probably sounds familiar. I think about my kids' healthcare before I ever think about mine, right? So they think about their pet before they're thinking about themselves. So what we say is, you can come and get free veterinary services as long as you talk to the psychiatrist, right? As long as you just say hello, as long as you just say hello to the medical provider, and it offers a really great opportunity to make a connection and open up that conversation and that door. So we've done that now at, I think, two of our locations, and it's been really wonderful. You want to talk about the community partnerships?
I'll speak to the jobs specifically. So as Amie mentioned, a lot of people are employed. A lot of people are also sustained by public benefits or Social Security or disability. Even within those systems, there's room for gainful employment, and supported employment is considered an effective intervention, a mental health intervention, actually. So at 90 Sands, we have 2 supportive employment specialists and an employment supervisor, where folks can voluntarily enroll in that service in addition to the case management services that they receive to get help towards getting a job. As Amie mentioned, this might be something part-time. It's based on what that person is able to manage with everything else that they may have to manage. But we do have those services in place in all of our programs, not just 90 Sands. Similarly, actually, at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, where we did do some partnership with Brooklyn Navy Yard, was around a job fair with our career services. But we are always looking for more community partnerships. And as we are sort of settling in, community is such a big part of our programs and buildings, but the community doesn't just exist in a building. It exists so much further than that. So we welcome any suggestions or ideas around community resources. And something that I feel very grateful for is how the community has been open and willing to embrace 90 Sands and our folks that have moved in. The library, who regularly comes to the community advisory board, sends us events that they have going on with a specific intention and goal to support the folks in the building and to connect in that community, in the larger community. Community is what keeps us all healthy in connection with others. So that piece on that.
Hi, my name is Mitty Owens, and I'm based in Brooklyn, but I work with an organization called the People's Solar Energy Fund that works in multiple cities and actually is more active elsewhere than in New York, so people wouldn't have heard of it. But I used to work in affordable housing, and I'm very inspired by this story, really inspired, and thank you for the great presentations. Well, I think there's, even among liberals, there's a very strong sense that the homeless population is just, or the unhoused population is just beyond what policymakers and developers can, and social service people can even deal with. It's people are either don't want to be housed, or the mental health issues, the violence, whatever, is beyond what we can really manage. I think a lot of people have just thrown up their hands around that, and you present wonderful testimony to the contrary. And so, as wonderful as Breaking Ground is overall, you said about 5,000 units through your different buildings. As we know, I don't know, the latest count is maybe 50,000 or something. I remember from a couple of years ago, the unhoused count. So what is the secret sauce that you can describe to folks as to how we really break through? Obviously, wraparound services is critical, right? But beyond, I mean, people know that, but what is beyond just what's on paper that's working so well for you, that works for this population? Because it sounds like you're able to really retain people. You're not having terrible turnover and, you know, problems that cause people to be evicted regularly. It sounds like there's stability and it's really working for folks. So how can we spread this? So number one, a little more as to how it really works and how can we spread this message to change the growing prevailing sentiment that this is just beyond what we can do.
I am so glad you are asking these questions, and I'm excited to answer these ones. Yes, I mean, we know what works, right? I mean, we know from our own data, we're the largest supportive housing provider in the state, possibly in the country, and we have a 98% retention rate of people exiting homelessness. We have an eviction rate that's less than 0.5%. We know that it really, really works for these folks, for people experiencing long histories of homelessness and have other needs. It's the gold standard, and it's not a secret. Like, people know generally like that this works. I think where, I mean, one of the big issues is that there's just not enough of it, right? Like, how do we get more of it? And there's the general affordability crisis that just has a downward spiral effect, because that lack of general affordable housing means that we're not able, like we're perpetuating a cycle, a really problematic cycle, where people that fall on hard times and just purely economic reasons find themselves in the shelter system because there's just not enough affordable housing. And once that starts, being in the shelter system starts that cycle of trauma that Sarah was talking about, and we just dig ourselves this massively deep hole, that now becomes more than just an economic issue, right? And so there's the affordability piece, and there's not enough of the supportive housing. I think and then we find ourselves with these other crises that we could never have predicted, like COVID, like the opioid epidemic, although I suppose we could have predicted a little bit of that if we don't get me down that path. But we've got the opioid crisis, we've got the asylum seekers, right, who are here too, and we've got another gigantic crisis that is contributing to the homelessness issue in New York City and around the country. So the shelter system is, aside from the asylum seekers, I think is around like 60,000. I don't have the number off the top of my head. I should. But the asylum seekers are it's over 100,000, right? Well over 100,000 with the asylum seekers just in the shelter system. On the street, it's around, let's say 5,000. Let's just say probably around 5,000 is the best kind of number estimate that we have of people who are living unsheltered on the streets in New York City. In other cities, that's really flip-flopped. And that's because in New York City, we have a right to shelter, right? So we see that those kind of numbers really flip-flopped. We need continued investment in what we know works. We need continued investment in from the state, from the city, from the federal government in affordable housing development and in supportive housing development. And that needs to continue to be a priority. And we need much, much more of it if we're ever going to make a real dent, real progress. Because when you're faced with these other crises, how could we ever keep up, right, with the inflow of people experiencing homelessness if we don't have enough of these resources? And we've just got to get there with enough of the resources. The other thing I think that's a really big way, and when people ask, what can we do to help, right? What can I personally do to help? We talk a lot about NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. And what happens a lot, even with the most liberal of our friends, is it sounds great to bring in more affordable housing into the city. It sounds great to bring this wonderful model that we know works for supportive housing. It'd be great though if you could do it not right here. Right? Not right here. Go do it over there. Go do it somewhere else. It's a massive challenge that we face. And quite frankly, deals just fall apart. Deals crumble before they can even become something, to talk about because of NIMBYism. So something that every New Yorker can do every single day is when they see these opportunities, when you're talking to your community boards, your elected officials are supporting these projects, and get to know the providers who are doing them. And what we say is, like, the proof is in the pudding. So, and we did this with 90 Sands too. I get why people might have questions. I get why people might have some concerns about what's coming into their communities. Get to know us, come visit our buildings, come tour our other buildings, and then hold us accountable when we get here. And that I think is how we also start spreading kind of more acceptance and combat some of the NIMBYism that happens, because that's a really real issue and a big reason why we don't get to have more of it. So those are few things.
She answered perfectly. I think the only thing I would add is the affordability piece and really understanding how affordable supportive housing is in comparison to other interventions such as shelter or hospitalization. I think it's $30 a day to house someone in supportive housing, cross-reference with hundreds and thousands it can cost otherwise.
Good morning. My first impression when I walked into the room, and I wasn't the first person here, was my disappointment in not having a room packed to the rafters with standing room only, given the issue that is being presented here. So, including some people who I told them they should be here. So I'll get back to them afterwards. I'm Maria Roca. I'm a longtime resident of Sunset Park since I was 14, and that was yesterday. Was absent from the neighborhood for a while for the problems that the city went through, many neighborhoods like Sunset Park, working class traditionally and whatnot, but had the common sense to come back before the real estate prices priced me out in 1994, 95. And then founded the Friends of Sunset Park, which I'm representing here. Basically, a group of parents wanting to do something about the dismal reality of what that beautiful, beautiful park, if anyone has ever been to Sunset Park, we are the jewel in the crown of parks. No one else has that site. No one else has that park. So that brought myself and the other people who I gather, mothers all, to realize that the park was only a symptom, what was going on in the park of the community. And so we started, more people started picking up the phone or meeting us at the park when we had events and all that. Oh, can you do this? Can you also do that? And I go, so where are the nonprofits in all of this? I knew, because of my background, who else was in the neighborhood, and we were nobody. I mean, no money, just using our heads and using our wit. So I'm pleased to be here. I'm happy to be here. Your reputation precedes you in a very good way. So I have basically two questions. One is about the makeup of the population. I am, and it's an assumption, 18 to whatever as people, okay, that's one. I want to put the questions out and then, and also how that population is cited. I mean, are there floors just for women, or, whatever the permutation is. And personally, concerned about the need, but from what I see, how homelessness affects women as they age, or even as they're young, differently than it does to other populations. Because I see that, because I see myself as I grow older, gee, if this were to happen to me, I would not know where to start. My needs are a little different. The other group's needs are a little different. So that's that. And the other question is about energy, the energy in the building, the power sources. Is this a LEED building? Is this, where is the building getting its power? And, the solar, the wind, the geothermal. Are there any plans for a hydroponic farm in that building? You certainly have the square footage. And when you were talking about the 3 basements or whatever, I go, that would be a nice thing, and provide your own, not all of it, but some of your own food for the population and the neighborhood. So I'll leave it at that, because I could go on and on and on with questions. And just pleased to be here, and thank you to everyone who put this event together. And next time we're going to work together and get the standing room only way. Thank you.
Yeah, also, this is not LEED. Do you know, Marina? No, we weren't able to, because it was old and hard to do that with old buildings. Our new buildings absolutely are LEED certified at different levels. And I think I mentioned earlier, our newest developments are even passive house design. So just the state of the art in terms of energy efficiency. This building, just because of the age of the building and what we were able to do with rehab, is not. Mhm.
Was a retrofitted
Yes,
building.
yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, because when speaking to other people before this
Mhm.
event and trying to get them to come here and learn some things, and even myself, I haven't been in it or anything, thought that there was sort of the old building, and then they really brought it up to code, and I'm sorry, the Jehovah's Witnesses had done that. And shame on them for not doing that.
It was developed in 1992. So certainly not the oldest building that we have, but not the newest, energy efficiencies for sure. So we did do a lot of work after we acquired it in the rehab. We upgraded many of the systems, but to bring it up to, the state of the art is just that level wasn't feasible. But we'll continue to reinvest. There's opportunities for us, down the line to continue to reinvest over time in the building and making upgrades. So we'll see what the future brings, but and we don't have solar or anything yet, but those are always things that we're kind of looking at in the building. I mean, the supportive housing in general, I mean, there's razor thin margins for these buildings. So there's, at the time of new ground up construction, there's oftentimes a lot more opportunity to kind of do some of those new state of the art type of design elements, which we bring in. And we try to do that in our retrofit too, as much as possible and in our renovations. But we have to work within, the confines of what we have available. You asked about the aging, right, and gender and women, and how that impacts how homelessness and how all of this impacts. And I think that was a really great and special question. There's a disproportionate number of men on the street in street homelessness, right? And in the family shelter system, we see much of that headed by women, head of households. On the street, we're seeing mostly men, but the women who are on the street, and also gender nonconforming, right? The level of trauma is just amplified even greater. Anybody experiencing any kind of homelessness, there's a level of trauma. Street homelessness, another element of trauma, and then add in female or gender nonconforming, and it's even more complicated. And their risk of being victims of violence and other traumas is exponentially greater. So that is something that absolutely impacts when they come inside, both when we're working with them on the street, in transitional housing, and then ultimately, though, when they're in permanent supportive housing. It's another element and thing that Sarah and her team have to think about and work with. We talk a lot about being person-centered in our social work philosophy, but what that really means is there's no one size fits all. So we try to, our work is about getting to know who the person is, what's going on for them, what their experiences are, what their traumas might be, and then fitting our approach, our service intervention, or even from a property management perspective, adjusting ourselves so that we're meeting them literally, and figuratively where they're at, so that we can kind of speak that same language with one another and help them, maneuver through. What's going on with aging, of course, I think we all are well aware that we know that seniors are our fastest growing homeless population, and the risks for them are really real in some different ways. So what part of the way that we're addressing that is through new developments specifically for seniors. So we have some standalone buildings at Breaking Ground that are specifically for seniors. And again, when we talk about seniors, I don't think it's very senior, really. Some of the funding is for people 62 and older for seniors. We really try to secure it in a way that allows us to go to 55 because of that factor that I talked about before, that people experiencing long-term homelessness are about 20 to 30 years kind of the medical needs that they have are people about 20 to 30 years older. So getting people at 55, we haven't really been that successful at going lower than 55, but but a lot of it is for either 55 and above or 62 and above. So we do have some. We have our newest building that's in development. We're just coming out of the ground now. Is a senior residence in Jamaica, Queens. And that's a really interesting new building and partnership for us. We're going to have a federally qualified healthcare facility on the first floor. I think it's like 15,000 square feet. So we will have embedded on the first floor of that building a community healthcare clinic. Which is a new endeavor too. So that's exciting. What we also do is we've recognized that our tenant, because as I mentioned before, there's a 98% retention rate for people exiting homelessness when they move into our buildings. So we are layering on specialized, what we've called at Breaking Ground, an aging services, clinical aging services team. So this is a team that is, in addition to whatever the building-based social service team is, they can float around and offer specialized, enhanced services for our folks who are aging in place, who might have some really complicated, navigating through Medicare, through Medicaid, through home healthcare service. I mean, it is like you need an advanced degree, I feel like, to interpret what's going on and help connect people. So they've done some really important work helping to bring in specialized additional services and allow, really what it's meant is we've allowed people to age in community in our buildings with longer without having to go to a higher level of care. So we're bringing that, we're adjusting ourselves and bringing in new service models so that we can meet the needs of those tenants.
Amie essentially stole the words right out of my mouth, almost verbatim. It's just sort of how our services have to evolve. Again, with the 98% retention rate, folks are aging in their homes. We all, I think, as we age, prefer to stay in our place of choice, which is home usually. So our services have to evolve, and we have to expand our knowledge base, expand our service base in terms of additional teams. But then even with the teams that exist, expanding our knowledge and our understanding of how to link services to folks. With a 98% retention rate, life happens. People do have babies in supportive housing. And what we have to do is try to link people to the most appropriate setting if that setting isn't the most appropriate one. As people age, health issues come up. We assist people navigating those through their healthcare providers and systems. But then we also have to face and equip our staff to help people through end-of-life conversations sometimes, because that's a very real reality. And as Amie pointed out, folks who have had such extensive histories of street homelessness are physically, the demands on the body, you're talking about fast forwarding about 20 years. It's astronomical. So there's a lot of evolution that happens within supportive housing and the services that we provide on site that account for some of these things. And I'll just point in terms of the services for women specifically, our on-site medical providers are able to provide gynecological services to women who are living there and choose to enroll in that.
Okay, we have one more question, and
Hello. My name is Alex. Hello again. Hello, everybody. So New York has always been a reference model for, yes. Sorry. Yeah. So New York has always been a place to, like a reference place for the rest of the world, even though sometimes New Yorkers don't realize that, and a place to build models and see if they work, and if they work, then the rest of the world will copy them. And on that note, first of all, like I really admire, because one thing is to have the environment to create some models, and the other thing is to have the courage to actually implement them and go through all the process. I really admire and appreciate your work. And in terms of that model itself, is the financial strategy like replicable, and like the operational cost is generating enough revenue to keep it going without only relying into public funded and those things? And have you considered, or are you working with any ESCOs, which is energy service companies? They usually would look into a portfolio for maybe the other buildings, but they would look into a portfolio, and if they see an opportunity, to reduce the consumption, they will retrofit as an investment, and throughout the years, they will like get the money back. And because I understand that, as you said, like the margins are really like minimum for retrofitting or anything. But now that we have to comply with different local laws, that also means a burden in the whole financial stream, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Right. So the services are funded through a separate contract, through a services contract, through the, like, there's many different programs. So some of them are state only, some of them are city only, some of them are city and state partnership contracts. The one for 90 Sands is called 1515. It goes back to that housing agreement under de Blasio of 15,000 units over 15 years. That included rental subsidy, but it also included a separate pot of money for the social services. So CUCS 490 Sands has a long-term contract with the city to fund their social services. Some of the dollars in that services contract help offset a few of the dollars for like security costs, for example, but primarily it's used for direct social services costs in the buildings. And then separately from that, there's a rental subsidy. So we look for different types of rental subsidies, whether that's through something like the 1515 program, it could be a Section 8 subsidy, it could be some other, but we need some form of rental subsidy to come into all of the buildings. And then there's, the operating support too that we get through other ways. But generally speaking, yeah, I mean, they're designed to have all of your costs covered. I think, so I'll combine a couple of things. Is this replicable? Is it possible to do it anywhere and everywhere? Yes, but you need continued support, ongoing support from federal, state, city sources. In any one of our buildings, there's like a million, I don't know, I joke, it's like so many different types of funding that's coming in just to support one unit, between the capital, the subsidy, the services funding. Sometimes it's multiple sources for capital, you know what I mean? It's tons of sources of funding just for one unit. And I think one of the challenges, like in other parts of the country, is where they don't have that. We have that in New York, right? We have these different sources, and we've invested in New York. We've invested in affordable and supportive housing in ways that other communities haven't. We still need to go further, if you ask me. But other communities don't, and particularly rural communities that just don't have those options, and it's much harder for them to figure out how to do these models. Is it replicable? Yes, we need that continued ongoing support. The other thing that I think is, and we're really grappling with this right now, is how, so buildings that were underwritten many years ago with assumptions that just aren't true anymore, like the enormously rising insurance costs that were not accounted for years ago when these buildings were underwritten, that just make those margins even smaller and smaller and smaller. And at the end of the day, that means that it makes it harder for an operator to do the kinds of building repairs or upgrades or other things that we need to do to make this continue to have every building healthy and energy efficient, and beautiful and stable long term. So I think that's a real issue that the sector is grappling with right now, and there aren't a lot of great answers yet. But the city state is really, we are making them very much aware. So they are very much aware of these problems. We just need the solutions because it is a challenge. Yeah.
Do you have one more thing to say? Okay, you may have a comment. Oh, a comment and a comment. That's all right. We're patient. Promises. Okay.
Hello? You were speaking to the, okay. And Sunset Park has been, we're very welcoming community for always, every 10, 15 years, for as long as written history been around. There's a new group of people that come into New York. And Sunset Park is one of those communities, we're not the only one, who has traditionally and consistently been very welcoming, because you're smart. We know that that new blood keeps us alive and keeps us energetic and interesting and all that good stuff. But the failure, and it is a huge failure of the what we call homeless shelter industrial complex, not you people, those other people, and their failure to manage a property, the physical, the medical, all the aspects that you've been speaking about today is so dismal. It is dismal. And so when you place 50, 100 people in one of the many hotels that were built because in the, what, the 90s, I want to say, in advance of the arena, that was supposed to bring all the people, and they didn't want anybody to go home drunk so they could stay the night and spend some money. Not the real plan. And so on the zoning text allowing for hotels in M1, we went through we're still fighting all of that. And then you put 100 people needing the services that you just outlined here, and you don't do any of that. You do even less. You do maybe, if you're lucky, half of what is on that contract, and nobody's coming after those folks and saying, we gave you millions and millions in the aggregate of dollars to provide that, and you put it on a residential block because those hotels, because of the M1, blah, 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 is on a residential, so-called misuse, but the only mixed there is a hotel. Everybody else is residential. So we need to take care of that before we can see a reversal of the NIMBY, the not in my backyard. Because if the facility on your block is doing a good job, is being responsible to the residents, to the community, people are going to go, I can live with that. That's not a bad idea. That's actually, good. And you're not going to convert everybody, but that when the hotel thing in Sunset Park and other neighborhoods, people who would have been welcoming in the past all went, whoa, enough. So I'll leave that at that.
You, quick one.
In line with that, could we find a different word than affordable? Because it's so ridiculous. I have access to health insurance. I also have access to buy a yacht. That doesn't mean anything. When I hear that the city is paying, New York City is run by the real estate industries, when I hear that people are being housed in hotels at $300 a day, it breaks down everything. Affordable is in the, some people. So can we find a different word that would indicate how critical this misconception of what's affordable and what's not affordable?
Okay, and with that, we've had a wonderful combination of intelligence and idealism. And we are very honored to have such nice new neighbors. And so City Tech, and you might think you're talking about ghost kitchens, and I'm saying, oh, we have a hotel management program here. And then, of course, we have our HVAC component, right actually in a building next door to you almost, where courses are taught. And at any rate, welcome to the community. We hope to see you again. And thank you very much for just presenting this idealism and intelligence and how to face an intractable but chip away at kind of problem. And to everyone else, thank you very much for coming here today, and welcome back. Our programs will continue to be in person, and we will hope Maria brings a busload of people to our next, so that we'll have one. Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.